Well, looks like we have a good number of participants joining us already. I'm going to give it another minute or two for more people to dial in. It's merely 1:01. We'll give it to another minute or two for some more people to dive in. My name is Ed Espinoza. I'm here with Progress Texas. Why don't we briefly go around the panel and have folks introduce themselves, and then we'll bring it back. Genevieve, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Ed. My name is Genevieve Van Cleve. I'm the state director for All on the Line. We are an affiliate of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, and our chairman is former Attorney General Eric Holder, and Texas is on the top of the NDRC's list of priorities this cycle, and we'll be talking a little bit about some of one of our affiliates, the National Redistricting Foundation's work in Texas in the courts here once we get started. So thanks for having us and look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. I'm Royce Brooks. I'm the executive director of Annie's List. We are a 17-year-old organization dedicated to recruiting, training, and electing pro-choice progressive women all across Texas. Really excited to be joining such an illustrious panel today, and looking forward to the conversation.
Hey y'all, I'm Raven Douglas. I'm the political director at Move Texas Action Fund. We are a grassroots nonpartisan organization that works to build power in underrepresented youth communities. We've registered over 100,000 young people to vote since our organization started in 2013. So increasing access to elections and ensuring that not only young people, but all people can participate in safe elections is really critical to the work that we do.
Good stuff. Thank you, Genevieve, Royce, and Raven. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Ed Espinoza. I'm the executive director at Progress Texas. We are a nonprofit media organization promoting progressive messages and actions. And what better of a message and an action is there right now than vote by mail? So before we dive in, I'm still waiting for some people to join. I see that number ticking up. We're at 88 right now, which is fantastic. As a point of clarification, as we get going, there will be questions towards the end. So if you have an opportunity, if you have some things that you want more information about, please put it in the chat. I'm trying to remember how we have structured that. Is there somebody that can chime in and say how the question and answer session will go? Is posting in the chat the right way to do it? And will there be someone to read that, or does that someone fall on me?
No, Ed. So, hey, it's Safik here, everyone from Progress Texas. In the bottom toolbar up the Zoom screen, you'll see a little Q&A button. And when you can put questions in over there. And then at the very end of the session, we have about 15, 20 minutes set aside for us to get those questions answered. And I'll basically read the questions to the panelists, and then they can kind of pick it up as it best suits their expertise.
Excellent. That's great. And as we go between speakers, I'll offer reminders for people who have maybe joined us late and aren't familiar with the Q&A session. I'll also I'll do callbacks to the agenda. All right. So looking at our agenda, we are at 1:05. We have done our welcome with our brief welcome introducing our guests. So let me kick it off to welcome to our attendees. Thank you all for joining us. As a reminder, this is a Zoom town hall about vote by mail, which is one of the biggest issues in Texas right now. As you may know, Texas is one of only 7 states in the whole country that limits vote by mail based on age. There was an important ruling about this last night that said it could go through. Moments ago, Attorney General Ken Paxton filed his appeal. So this is going to be a back and forth court issue that we're going to talk about this morning. This afternoon, and we'll go into more details about what this means for the campaigns and what this means for organizing as well. One more time before we start, I am Ed Espinoza with Progress Texas. Joining me is Genevieve Van Cleve with All on the Line. Also, Royce Brooks with Annie's List and Raven Douglas with Move Texas. We are all here to give you an insider's point of view, really let you know what the nuts and bolts are of how these things are working behind the scenes. So whereas you normally might get some quick sound bites over social media or over email, the purpose of today's call is to really dive a little bit deeper and get into the nitty-gritty of what's happening and to give you that insider's perspective. So I hope that we're able to achieve that. And again, if you have questions, look to the bottom of your Zoom screen. There is a Q&A icon. Please click on that, put your questions there, and we will get to them as quickly as possible. Okay, so with that, actually moving a little bit ahead of schedule. So Genevieve, if you're ready, I would like to kind of set up the idea of the lawsuits and then have you run with it. You ready? Let's do it. I think you're on mute, by the way. So there are a number of lawsuits going around right now. There's 4 as far as I can keep track of. The Texas Democratic Party has got one. LULAC has got one. Genevieve's organization has 2. There are various premises here. One is that voters should be able to invoke the disability clause of the vote by mail regulations to be able to vote, since showing up to a polling place could harm anyone's health and safety. There's so many unpredictable things associated with coronavirus that people need to take every precaution. The other element here is, as I mentioned earlier, Texas is one of only 7 states to limit voting by age. I'm gonna kind of leave it there, and Genevieve, let you dive in a bit more at length and tell us a little bit more about what's happening with vote by mail in Texas and what other things people need to know.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Ed Progress Texas, for putting this together. I don't know where we'd be without the work of Annie's List, Move, and Progress in Texas, and I'm very happy to be here today. So my portion of this panel is where there's a lot of fluidity. So let's just talk about, let's start with the TDP, the Texas Democratic Party, filed cases in both state and federal court. This is important and a bit confusing, even for me. It's hard for me to keep this stuff straight. But the first that the public heard about expanding vote by mail in Texas is when the TDP filed in state court in Travis County with Judge Shulak, expressing not fear, it's important to note, not fear, but concern about voting in a pandemic, and asking the court to force the state to consider expanding vote by mail because people are concerned about their safety. And I think all of us on this call and most Americans would agree that you should not have to endanger yourself or your family members to vote. There are plenty of examples in American history. America has gone through tough times and maintained our ability to vote safely. Certainly in the Civil War, it was not a sure thing that going to the polls would be safe. The Great Depression, World War II, we have always met these challenges. With this most recent challenge, this pandemic, the state of Texas has simply surrendered, really, any sort of leadership and left it to the counties and then punished them for leading. So that's why you go to court, right? To have a determination on who's in charge and rights being protected. So the state court in Travis County held that anyone that had a concern about voting in person would be allowed to vote by mail. That court decision was upheld by an appellate court in the state of Texas, and the state Supreme Court, Ken Paxton, asked for something really kind of that courts frown upon, which is a writ of mandamus, essentially threatening or stopping the counties where the most Texans live for addressing voting during a pandemic. So if you live in Travis County, Dallas County, Cameron County, El Paso County, and Harris County, your county judges and county commissioners have expanded your ability to vote by mail, and are also really trying to plan for all of us to vote, whether in person or by mail, safely in both the July primary runoff election and then, of course, in November. So that's where that state court, that's where that case lives right now. Now, the TDP also filed a federal case in federal court in San Antonio. And we heard at a hearing last week the arguments by the state and the TDP and Chad Dunn. And Judge Bieri really came out day before yesterday, or really yesterday.
Last night.
Yeah, I can't believe it. I think many of you probably feel like I do, like, was it yesterday or 2 weeks ago? Pandemic time has no structure. So, but Judge Bieri really did an amazing job and a very thorough, interesting set of arguments about upholding people's right to vote by mail in a pandemic. And if you haven't seen his comments, I recommend going to the Texas Tribune or looking at what Progress Texas has sent out and some of the other organizations have sent out about his amazing statements. It's been a long time since a judge in Texas so thoroughly dressed down an attorney general. And I encourage you, the folks on this call, look, you are already very tuned in, you're on this call. Look at those comments from Judge Bieri. It's something else. He made sure to let us know that he believed that liberty also included voting, even during a pandemic, and that we were not a nation run by a king. And I haven't read anything like that from a judge, frankly, in my entire adult life, since I was in college, right? So, so the federal court, with the TDP case, said, yes, in fact, it's okay to vote by mail. If you have a concern about the pandemic, it's fine to apply to vote by mail, and then fill out your application, have your ballot given to you, and then return that ballot in a timely fashion. Ken Paxton didn't miss a beat and immediately filed an appeal with the Fifth Circuit Court, not known for their enlightened views, really kind of one of the most conservative panels of judges in the United States. They're located in New Orleans. So it's a surprise to no one that Ken Paxton has taken that really kind of amazing next step in appealing this court case. Now, my affiliate organization, which is the National Redistricting Foundation, they're a C3, has filed 2 cases in Texas, 2 cases. The first, and both in federal court. The first is a 26th Amendment argument about vote by mail. I think probably Raven will probably have something to say about the age component of this discussion. On its face, preventing people from voting by mail that are under 65 is in variance with not only the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment, but also the 26th Amendment, which, as we all know, allows people 18 and older to vote. So the reasoning here is, like, if you're 64 and a half, why wouldn't you have the same access to the ballot as a 65-year-old? If you're 18 and a half, 19, 20, I mean, what is the arbitrary barrier put upon voting by the state? That's what's being explored in this case.
And Genevieve, if I can interject for a moment on how extraordinary that is. When you think about access to voting, I mentioned earlier that only 7 states restrict vote by mail based on age. And they're exactly the states that you might think they are. They're states like Tennessee and Kentucky, and of course, Texas is part of that as well. But think about vote by mail it's the same as if it were election day or early vote. You wouldn't say that only certain voters could go and cast ballots during early vote, or only certain voters can go on election day. So to say that only certain voters can vote by mail is really extraordinary. And many of the excuses that the conservatives have made here have said that they're worried about voter fraud, which is also, and I'll keep using this word, also extraordinary, because why would voter fraud exist for 2/3 of the electorate, but not for that 1/3 of the electorate that's age 65 and up? It just doesn't make any sense.
Ed, you could be a federal judge, because that's exactly what Judge Bieri questioned about the state's argument. There have been, I believe, 78 cases of confirmed voter fraud in Texas in the last 15 years. There's 26 million people and counting in Texas. It is an insignificant number of occurrences, and certainly the state's interest here in preventing people from accessing mail-in ballots that are under 65 does not, the arguments about fraud are specious. And we offer our military access to ballot by mail as well. And it's something that often our friends across the aisle are very proud of. Again, the arguments to limit this right to those that meet certain categories simply seems on its face like it's not in keeping with the 26th Amendment. The second,
go ahead. We have about 2 more minutes before Royce is up. But I want to just finish the thought.
I very quickly want to talk to you a little bit about our second case, because mail-in ballots are not a panacea. They're not a silver bullet. Our second case deals with the nitty-gritty of vote by mail, and we call it the 4 pillars case, which includes postage. Some people may not be able to get out of their house and buy a stamp. The ballot receipt deadline, we are also taking that on because it is not easy for voters to return mail-in ballots, and the dates that are provided by the state are limiting and confusing. The signature match requirement on your mail-in ballot application, we're also fighting that. Groups of citizens make up these ballot boards, and they're not, as far as I know, writing experts. So how would they be in a good place to see if you could have a mail-in ballot? And finally, how are we going to assist voters in places like retirement homes, like my 94-year-old grandmother? There's a law in the books right now that says certain types of assistance are a felony. And so unless we're going to check my grandmother in jail and all of her nurses, we're going to have to look at some of these nitty-gritty items. Right. The last thing I'll say, and what I want you to leave you with, is that Texas has a history of voter suppression, undercounting in the census, and hyper-partisan redistricting. Yeah. All of these issues are intricately connected. Think of this: when it's the legs of a stool. If one part of the stool isn't working, the entire stool falls apart. So when I think about voting by mail, free and fair elections, the census, and redistricting, I think of them as all one big activity. We know what Texas's history has been, and I am so excited to hear from Royce and Raven and work with people like you, Ed, to make sure that the future in Texas doesn't have the stain of racism and oppression as we have in the past. So I'm open for questions at the end, and there's lots more to say on this subject, but thanks for having me, Ed, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the other panelists have to say.
And thank you, Genevieve, for that insider insights into the 4 lawsuits here. It's a lot to keep up with, more than most people can keep up with. Even those of us who do this for a living have trouble keeping up with all of this. But the bottom line is that people should have a right to vote. Judge Bieri had a great comment in that he said it's better to vote via letter carrier than it is to vote near somebody who might be a disease carrier in the voting in the polling place. And I think that really kind of gets to the bottom of this here. Well, as a reminder, sorry, go ahead.
A little last PS, and then I'll close it down. You know what you can't hack? A mail-in ballot.
It's definitely,
That in
definitely
mind.
if people have questions, and I already see some coming in, for those who may be coming in late, there is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Feel free to click on that, post your question. In the meantime, I am going to hand this over to Royce Brooks, who is the Executive Director at Annie's List. Annie's List is an organization focused on mobilizing voters and supporting pro-choice Democratic women candidates. They are very involved in the campaign process. And she's going to talk a little bit about how the campaigns have responded to this and how the organizing is going on around it. Royce, you're still on mute. I'll give you a second to take off mute, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ed. I am really excited to share some thoughts here. I'd like to begin by building off of something that Genevieve just said. You know, a key phrase here that I think we understand to be a major driver of this is voter suppression, right? Despite the fact that data from states that have universal vote by mail show that there is no partisan advantage one way or the other when everybody can vote by mail. Our counterparts who are pushing to restrict Texans from being able to exercise that vote are clearly attempting to restrict who is able to cast a ballot, right? Genevieve spoke about age discrimination. Raven will have much more to say about that, the suppression of the youth vote. And, you know, this is part of a history, a shining history in Texas. You know, we here in Texas are in certain ways a policy lab for the country. And one of the places where we have long innovated is in laws that are designed to keep people from voting, be that the racially discriminatory voter ID laws that have been passed, be that now a refusal to expand vote by mail. This is what is at the heart of what is happening. And, you know, frankly, we have seen it throughout history. This is not, in fact, the first moment when people have been forced to choose between their health and safety and exercising their right to vote. We also know what people tend to choose. People exercise their right to vote. You know, we have seen it in the civil rights movement. You know, I have the stories that my grandparents told me about some of those days. We saw it just recently in Wisconsin. People lined up around the corner and down the block in order to make sure that their voice was heard. So despite the fact that a failure to expand vote by mail would certainly put Texans at risk, it is not going to stop Texans from voting. So you heard it here. It's not going to work. And with that, yes, I'm happy to talk a bit about what we are seeing within campaigns as they attempt to adjust to a daily changing situation at this point. We are working with a lot of candidates who really are, in the first place, advocating for the folks who are definitely eligible to vote by mail to do so. That is, campaigns are calling everybody 65 and older to help them get an application to vote by mail so that they can safely vote. And, you know, I think it is important to note that our older population is the same population that is very much at risk from COVID. So making sure that those folks are all taking advantage of their pre-existing right to vote by mail is important. We are seeing that despite the fact that this is a fight that is happening across the state and at the state level and in federal courts, the implications of this and the impacts are going to be hyper local. And that's really because, you know, at the end of the day, our elections are run county by county, which is another reason why actually electing county clerks who are committed to overseeing elections in the most inclusive way is vitally important. We're actually noting that state Senate candidates and candidates in rural areas are having some of the toughest times adjusting to the new rules and the new changes. And that's because those candidates are likely to be running in districts that span multiple counties. We are working with a state Senate candidate, Sarah Stapleton Barrera, whose Senate district spans 5 counties. And so she is having to work with each of those election offices and to relay different information to voters depending on which area of the district they live in.
Right, and before we wrap up and move on to Raven, I want to, you hit on a really important point there, in that the county clerks are so critical to this process. But the problem with 254 counties is that we also, in theory, have 254 clerks, and that the messaging and the decisions that have come out of these counties have been inconsistent, which is why, going back to these lawsuits, this is why these lawsuits are so important. We need to have a uniform standard to eliminate confusion so people know what's happening. And I think what you're explaining about the challenges that campaigns are experiencing is very real, because if the campaigns are experiencing it now, the voters are going to experience it later. Therefore, there's an urgency for us to do something now. I'll hand it back to you.
Absolutely. And so, you know, again, and Genevieve, I think, framed this out really well. This is, at this point, a daily changing situation. And so, you know, campaigns are doing their very best to be on top of it and to be able to provide information and to just sort of fill the leadership vacuum that clearly exists. But it's not easy. It's not straightforward. They are doing their best.
Well, I guess the good news is that it's still early in the cycle, and we have some time to figure it out, but not that much time prior to the runoff. Thank you, Royce, for that feedback. Obviously, we'll come back to everybody here at the end. Once Raven finishes, we're going to open it up to questions. Raven has the floor from 1:30 to 1:40, and we'll do a short wrap up. We already have about a dozen questions in the Q&A. It's at the bottom of your Zoom chat, the little Q&A chat. If there's anything that you want to put there, please do, and we will address it. Before we get to the questions, though, I want to bring in Raven, who has focused a lot on youth mobilization, voter registration and voter turnout. I've already seen some questions come through about those subjects. And Raven, I know that when we spoke the other day, you talked a lot about how you're organizing in counties and really trying to look at student populations that might normally be in one spot that are all diffused right now because they're not on campus, they're at home. I'll set it up with that, and then let you take it wherever you would like to. The floor is yours.
Yes, thanks, Ed, for having me today. And I saw a few of the questions in the Q&A box, and hopefully I can cover some of those in my next 8 minutes. But as Royce mentioned, elections are ran at the county level. There are 254 counties in Texas. And so that means that we have to work together really in a coalition with a number of different organizations to try to work with our county clerks and election administrators to ensure that we're prepared for our elections, not only in November, but also in July as well. And so some of the organizing work that has taken place at the county level has been done not only by MOVE, but also by a number of different organizations. So definitely wanted to shout that out and put in that feeler with organizations like Texas Organizing Project, Texas Freedom Network, and with legal guidance from Texas Civil Rights Project and a number of other organizations. So when COVID-19 began to significantly impact our elections, a group of us got into a room together and we were like, okay, what are some priorities that we can identify so that we can be prepared for our July elections? And so some of those things were, one, really pushing county clerks and election administrators to make a public statement around accepting applications that were marked disability. Currently, for this election and previous elections, counties do not investigate when you mark the disability box. So they take that at face value. So in the midst of all of the confusion that's happening with all of these lawsuits, if you feel like you qualify for a disability, you can check that box and you will receive a mail-in ballot. So we wanted to, one, make sure that communication was clear to voters in such a confusing time. One of the second things is that we know that's also been previously mentioned here is that vote by mail is not the one solution to all of our problems. And we know that there are certain communities who do not have consistent addresses, right? And so they may need to vote in person, or if someone just chooses to vote in person, we want to make sure that polling places are clean and they're safe, and that there are social distancing guidelines that are communicated to the public so they know when they go vote, to have their mask on or whatever those rules may be. The other thing is that we are really pushing for counties to, in either July and November or either or, is to send vote by mail applications to all registered voters over the age of 65. Those voters already qualify for a ballot by mail. And so we know that COVID-19 is impacting our senior citizens at a much higher rate than other demographics. And so we want to make sure that they have the access and ability to request a ballot by mail. And then if a county is really great and has the money to do so, we're asking for them to send a ballot by mail application, not the ballot, just the application, to every registered voter for the November election. Some other things that we are looking at too is trying to close as few polling locations as possible. We know that that can cause some confusion for, again, voters who choose to vote in person. And then we're doing a outreach campaign strategically around recruiting poll workers. And I saw a question about that. Poll workers with voters who are under the age of 30. So we know that there are a lot of college students and young people who are healthy enough and have the ability to work as poll workers. And so we want them to be able to, one, know about that opportunity and kind of step in, because we know that most of our current poll workers are over the age of 70. And so working with county clerks and election administrators, we have been able to get some we've been able to achieve some things thus far that I will go through quickly in some areas. I think what we've seen the best plan that we've really seen is in Harris County. And so I'm sure people have seen in the news, they passed this really big $12 million plan for elections this year. And that includes mailing applications to voters over the age of 65 for July, as well as they have committed to doing that in November for every single registered voter. I also saw a question about how can people track their their application in their ballot, there is actually a system where you can add a barcode to that. And so Harris County is committing to doing that as well. And they also have made plenty of public statements around accepting applications or not denying applications if it has the disability check marked on there. Some other things that we're seeing in other counties, Hayes County, where San Marcos is also has a really large university of about 45,000 students, has given a lot of great guidance on in-person polling locations. So they are going to be doing things like propping open the doors so people don't have to touch them. Poll workers will be required to wash their hands every 20 minutes. Machines will be wiped down after every use. And they're also going to use Q-tips to actually utilize those to vote so people don't have to touch the machine. And so it seems like, kind of a cheap fix, but it's an easy fix that actually works. And so we are really pushing for that communication to happen, not just in commissioner's court, where these election administrators are showing up to, but that conversation is actually, again, communicated to voters so that they know that, that they feel safe, they know that counties are working on it, and things like that.
You made a really important point that I want to emphasize. 2 points, actually. One is that little actions can make big differences. And things like propping doors open at polling places is really important. The other thing you mentioned earlier about how vote by mail is an important piece, but it's not the only piece to this, especially in a state where Republicans have tried to or have effectively outlawed mobile vote locations where we have limited ways to vote. One of the arguments that I heard yesterday was that we can't move to a 100% vote by mail system. And, the counter to that is that we're not trying to move to a 100% vote by mail system. We want vote by mail available to 100% of the voters, the same way early vote and election day vote is available to everybody, but that it is a tool in the toolbox to democracy. In that vote by mail isn't necessarily better for Democrats or Republicans, it's better for democracy. So some excellent points there. I wanted to take a moment to emphasize them. I'll hand the floor back to you.
Yeah, and that's really great. And I think, just emphasizing that we want there to be multiple options, right? So whether it's vote by mail, whether it's voting in person, we want the voter to be able to choose what they want to do, but they also need to have the access to do that. And so some other things that we've seen in some counties that is not necessarily great, but at least we're getting this communication early. And for example, in Travis County, they're saying for the July election that they're only going to have 20 early voting sites and 100 election day sites, which is a significant decrease of what we've seen in previous years. Also, they will not be having polling locations at grocery stores. So we're working with a number of different organizations and a number of different counties to really ensure that, one, we are trying our best to increase accessibility, and where that accessibility is not being increased, that is at least being communicated to voters so that people aren't showing up to where they traditionally vote and then they're confused and don't know where to go. I also saw a question, and I'll answer it quickly, around, what can young people do, especially if they're not at their registered address in November. And so if you are outside of the county that you live in during early voting and on election day, you already qualify for a ballot by mail. So the current requirements are you have to be 65 years or older, you have to be disabled, you have to be out of the county or be confined in jail and still eligible to vote. So we are definitely encouraging people, if they're over 65, request your ballot by mail. If you're outside of the county, request your ballot by mail, or if you fall under any of these circumstances. So that's just some of the organizing work that's happening at the local level, but we're definitely at a point where we can't really rely on our state leaders and really need to go again to that clerk and election administrator level to ensure that voters know what's happening in July and in November.
Well, that was excellent and very informative, Raven. Thank you very much. Thank you, Royce and Genevieve, for your presentations. At this point, with the town hall here, we can recap some of what we talked about and where we are today, where vote by mail stands right now, and what comes next. Briefly, as I mentioned at the top of the call, the vote by mail case is going back and forth in court. One judge says we can do it, another says we can, then another says we can't, then there's an appeal process. Last night, a federal judge says that every voter should have the right to vote by mail. This morning, the Attorney General has filed an appeal. That is one of 4 cases that are in the process right now. There's not an easy answer other than that we are paying very close attention to it and that we are hoping for the best. In the meantime, what I'd like to do now is,
Ed, that it's
yeah.
important to note that Bieri, in his order or whatever it's called, in the report he released, he made sure to speak specifically to AG Paxton's threats to voters and elected officials, and said that the Attorney General was not to move forward with any type of investigations or punitive actions. I think that's very important. The other question, well, I don't want to interrupt the flow of what you're trying to do here, Ed, but the other thing that matters here is while we're waiting, I mean, the people that are in charge of elections for counties, county administrators that do elections, the legislature would have to convene and statutes would have to be changed for election administrators to begin I don't know, investigative squad to prove whether you were really concerned about COVID or not. That would be a tremendous change.
right.
And I don't see Governor Abbott asking the legislature to convene to discuss elections, voting, or any of the other parts of our daily lives that have been affected by COVID. I just don't think they're going to come back to figure out ways to imprison Texans. If they do, all of our organizations and everyone on this call has a very different job at that point.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a long, winding road. And to your point, Michael Apodaca, friend of Progress Texas, actually commented earlier that he used to sit on one of those vote by mail ballot boards, and it was always hard for them to make those decisions over which ones they could accept and not accept because they're not experts. They said it was a very difficult position for them to put in. And really, it should be between the voter and, well, it should be up to the voter. All right, at this point, I'm going to hand it over to our question readers to go over some of your questions that you've submitted. And I believe that is handed either to Satvik or is it Satvik?
Yes.
All right, take it away.
We answered a couple questions, and Genevieve, thank you for kind of going in there and typing some of the questions to folks. So I'm going to go with Hazel Weathers. This is what she had to say. I just heard that the state of Michigan has a system for notifying a voter that their ballot has been received, basically tracking the mail-in ballot through the system. Will we have a process that helps ensure the confidence of the voter that the vote wasn't, quote unquote, lost in the mail or rejected for some reason?
Yeah, that is a great question. And some counties like Harris County, they are going to have a barcode on your application where you are able to track that through the mail. That is not a requirement. So, and it costs additional dollars to do that. So I don't foresee every county being able to do that, but it's definitely something that counties have the ability to do, and that, you should definitely be pushing in your county to do as well.
This is one of the problems with vote by mail in Texas generally, and it's a known problem, and it's a part of our 4-pillar suit, is that if a ballot board decides that your signature does not match what's on file, there's no way to cure that in a timely fashion. Furthermore, there's other cases in the country, like in Georgia, where the signature match requirement has been struck down simply because, as the friend of Progress Texas mentioned, the people on these boards are not handwriting experts. And as we know, our handwriting changes over time. And say if you've had a stroke or if you've lost a hand, maybe your handwriting doesn't look the same as it did when you first filled out your voter reg application. So we feel like this is a significant barrier, and many counties do not let you know if there is a problem with your application. So that is part of our suit because it is absolutely a hole in this process and it needs to be addressed.
Thanks, both of you. The next question is really important. I think even if we win all the court cases and everyone's able to vote by mail, there's still one underlying question. So this is from Jeff Mankoff. How hard will it be to inform and teach voters how to vote by mail? This is the big question.
So when I'm not talking about the C3 affiliate that's suing Texas, my actual job was supposed to be redistricting, but if you don't have free and fair elections and if the census isn't finished or completed in any significant or real way, then redistricting doesn't get done. So what I will tell you is that at least for our organization, and I'm sure every organization has their own plan, and hopefully we can coordinate a little bit together. This is the hill to climb on mail-in ballots in Texas. Even if you have kept up with the news, faithfully watched these cases go through court, most of us have never voted by mail that aren't already 65 or over, or have some disability, or in the military. And so we need to use all of the channels, all of the media, all of the talents that we have to inform the public about how to fill out an application, have it returned, and then fill out the ballot and get it back to where it needs to be counted. For example, some folks have started to fill out these applications and draw their own box instead of checking the disability box, draw their own box and just say COVID is the reason that they're asking for a mail-in ballot. That application will be rejected. You have to fill out the application as it is. So there's a hill to climb. My organization, the C4 part, the part that I'm actually have the most agency in, I'm the state director of All on the Line. We intend to do a public education campaign beginning in June all the way through July, and then as we ramp up for November.
I can also add, for people who are learning how to vote by mail, there's 2 resources you can check out. Of course, there's the Texas Secretary of State, which has some information, though if you're looking for additional resources, Progress Texas and a number of other groups have a webpage called govotexas.org. That's govotexas.org. And in the Go Vote section of Go Vote Texas is a frequently asked questions. One of them is, who can vote by mail and how? We're in the process of updating that language right now, but there are instructions there to help you through this. I say we're in the process of updating it because some of the legalities around it make it hard for us to give definitive direction there now. But in the meantime, govotexas.org will be one of the resources that can help you once we get more clarity on this. Okay, Satvik, I'm gonna hand it back. Sorry, it looks like Royce wanted to say something.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I just wanted to jump in and add that there's quite a bit of voter education that needs to happen this cycle in particular. Not only will we have potentially people voting by mail for the first time, we also have for the first time the absence of straight ticket voting here in Texas, despite the fact that data from other states that have eliminated straight ticket voting shows that there's no partisan advantage one way or another. It's clear that the folks who pushed for this were looking for a partisan outcome. But all that to say, campaigns and organizations have already been working to educate along that front. There's sort of a system in place for pushing out the voter education that just needs to happen this cycle.
Great, very helpful, thank you. I'm gonna try, let's see if we can move through the remaining questions with as much efficiency, because I see that there are a lot of them. Satvik, we are in your hands. Take it away.
Great, thanks everyone so far. This next question, it's from Elizabeth Bray, and I'm gonna condense it a little bit because some of them were already answered. But the big portion of the question is, if you're someone who already applied to vote by mail when it was quote unquote legal, and it gets overturned, will you be struck off the rolls? Like what happens to you then? Like what is the next step that you should take?
Oh, Elizabeth, that is a very good question. You know, that is in the hands of judges. You know, I don't want to guess. It's in the hand of judges. I have a Pflugerville High School law degree to fall back on. I am not myself a lawyer. So I would look for some of the folks that are leading the charge, like on our case and in other cases in Texas, for guidance there. And I'm happy to take on trying to find the answer to that question and getting back to you. I happen to know Elizabeth, so I know how to get a hold of her. But it's a real question for everyone. Again, I look at, they would have to come back and change statute to investigate voters. And we have a federal judge now telling the Attorney General not to do that. Those are good indicators of what may be to come. But gosh, things have been so topsy-turvy in this particular cycle that I would hesitate to guess. And look forward to clarity on that point.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately with the situation right now, we really do just have to wait on the courts.
Great. Another question. This one is a little bit broader, but it's a two-parter from Laura Moorman. A, can I register to vote online? And B, can I register to vote by mail online? Or apply to vote by mail online?
So to answer your first question, technically, Texas does not have an end-to-end system for online voter registration. So you can complete the form on the Secretary of State's website, or you can go to movetexas.org/register, complete the form. If you do it through the Secretary of State's website, you will have to print it out, sign it, and mail it to your local elections department. If you do it through our website, we will send you a completed form where you sign it, and then we will include postage for you to mail it. So that's good for people who don't own a printer like me, that can go ahead and do that. And yes, you also can request your ballot by mail online. I think Jeff went ahead and dropped the link in there, but you fill out the form, you turn it in, you mail it, and then you mail it to your local elections department. So you can do both of those things online, but unfortunately there's no end-to-end system where you can just click submit and it goes through.
Awesome. Question from Joel Mayer. Based on how this, one day it's legal, the next day it's not legal, can Paxton prosecute me if he's encouraging his under 65 friends to vote by mail? And who do you think Paxton's really targeting with the threat to go after people who are encouraging others to vote by mail?
I would assume that he would go after organizations that are interested in informing the public about what their rights are. I would assume that he would be interested in organizations like the ones that are speaking to you today.
Thanks, Genevieve.
But
go ahead.
As a point of clarification, Genevieve, did Judge Bieri smack down Ken Paxton's comments last night and say that he can't tell people not to advocate for voting by mail, or was it a different ruling? I seem to remember something like that coming out somewhere. That's you're shaking your head. That's not correct.
The ruling says the judge is discouraging him from doing so. But if we know anything about indicted Attorney General Ken Paxton, who has never faced a jury of his peers for felony securities fraud, we know that he's not necessarily interested in what a particular judge says to him.
Right.
In fact, somebody has filed a complaint in Dallas suggesting that his hassling of voters and his saber rattling and threatening of voters actually is voter suppression and should be tried in criminal court. The question for me is, of course, he's out on bond. And so the judge in Houston that now has his case has to decide whether him threatening Texas voters and Texas organizations and Texas public officials rises to the level where he needs to be detained and tried.
All right. Another subject that I'm sure we could have a whole other Zoom town hall on. Sophic, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah. One more thing, Sophic, before we answer the question. I just wanted to mention that the 2 or 3 letters that Ken Paxton has released have been informal letters of advice that he calls them. These are not letters or official statements coming from his office. So they are absolutely a means to intimidate voters and organizations, but they aren't formal, they're not formal directions given from his office.
Got it. Thank you. Question from Betsy Hudson. This has been very informative and helpful to us lay people. If this is handled at the county level, is there a county by county strategy plan in the works or already in existence? Coalitions that have formed or should be formed, which would help candidates and concerned citizens develop and execute a consistent, targeted set of messages and actions. So I think she's wondering, is there a county by county strategy to like get vote by mail implemented?
I can address that briefly. We did explore those things early on. What has stifled that effort at the moment are the legal proceedings. This is basically out of the hands of the counties and into the hands of the judges at this point. So until we have more guidance and more decisions from the courts, that is going to direct how we can proceed after that. So some conversations within voting coalitions have happened. They will continue again once we get more clarity after the legal proceedings.
Thanks, Ed. I think we have time for one last question. This is, I think, pretty big because I think all of us can answer this. This is from Azam Sheikh. Can we start something on change.org for our current situations, or is there something that's already out there that people can sign on to support vote by mail?
First and foremost, Progress Texas on the homepage of our website right now has a petition of people who are calling on the state to have a vote by mail, 100% vote by mail access for anyone who wants it. You can find that on the homepage of progresstexas.org. I know that Annie's List has also had a similar petition like that, but there are definitely efforts where here in state that we've been working on to build a community. And in fact, all of the people that Progress Texas invited to this town hall were people who signed on to that petition, as opposed to our entire audience. We wanted to be very specific to people who are very involved in this movement right now. And we invite people to become a part of that. I'd be happy.
You're muted.
I'd be happy to hand it over to anyone else who would like to share anything more.
Yeah, we launched a petition yesterday, which you can find on all of our social media and on our website, a Don't Mess with Vote by Mail petition that started yesterday to really tell Ken Paxton that we are not going to be intimidated by his tactics, and to call on him to take politics out of our voting system. And so that did launch yesterday. So definitely visit our website and our social media to sign that. And I'll drop the link in the chat box.
Just a quick end for me anyway. When I heard I was going to be talking to a group of people that have already signed a petition that care about ballot by mail, I was really relieved. I think in all of this, it is easy to lose hope. To keep your eyes on the prize is pretty difficult these days. Whatever we decide to do as individuals.
It's 2 o'clock.
Oh, that's my computer talking to me. It's my only pandemic friend. But anyway, I just thank you for being a part of this call, and Ed for organizing it. All of us have specific organizational goals, but working with the people on this call and relying on the people of this call to continue to fight for democracy gives me a great deal of hope. And I hope we get together as a group again. Because I feel like if you're willing to sign a petition for vote by mail, then you're willing to hear a little bit more about how the census is going, and you're willing to hear a little bit more about how redistricting is going to work. I think we have a big job to do, and I'm relying on this group, frankly, to lead some of the work that we do, and to partner with y'all. So thanks for having me and all on the line, and that's it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Genevieve. Any final thoughts from Raven or Royce?
Thanks. Yes, I echo Genevieve in thanking you, Ed, for bringing us together for this. I hope that it's been helpful for folks, one thing that I would like to leave people with as we go forward is the fact that vote by mail is a practical and workable option as long as people are able to mail things. We are seeing, as we speak, a concerted attack on the US Postal Service by the president and members of his party in Congress. The US Postal Service being an institution that is in fact older than this country itself. We need to make sure that the US Postal Service remains intact and funded and able to serve our needs. And so for folks looking for their next issue to embrace, I would like to add that one to the list.
Yeah, and I will just quickly thank Progress Texas again for putting this on, and definitely Jen and Royce for joining me in this conversation. The only tidbit that I'll add is if you are interested in working elections, go to workelections.com to sign up to be a poll worker. If you are healthy enough and confident enough to do that, counties are significantly concerned that there will be a drop in poll worker availability. And then my other tidbit is that if you know a young person who has been displaced because of COVID-19 and they're not in this county that they're registered in, just remind them that they do qualify for a ballot by mail. And we hopefully give you a lot of information on how to do that process, and you can walk them through that.
All right. Well, Raven from movetexas.org, Royce from annieslist.com.org. .com. All right. And then Genevieve from All on the Line, which is the C4 affiliate of the National Democratic Redistricting Council. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, all of the attendees who showed up today, giving us an hour of your time to hear us talk about this. We might be talking about this issue, but those of you watching, you are the real influence. You're the real influencers here. You're the real MVPs, because it's all your friends and family that are going to come to you looking for information and looking for other materials to influence what they can do and to share information with them. And as was mentioned earlier, I do hope that this is not the last time we get together. I found this very informative as well with some of your questions here, and I'd love to do it again soon. So for this entire panel, I am Ed Espinoza with Progress Texas. Thank you so much for your time, and we will be in touch again soon. Be safe and wash your hands.